What if the wild doesn't just survive, but chooses to protect? It was supposed to be a simple patrol. A few hours. Check a trail camera. Back before dark. But when Ranger Adam Calloway's radio went silent in the middle of Montana's Grizzly country, and night fell with no sign of him, his team feared the worst. What they found the next morning stunned them. Not because of what was missing, but because of what was there. There, lying unconscious at the edge of a forest ridge, Adam's body was surrounded. Not by fellow rangers. Not by wolves. But by grizzly bears. 5 of them. A full-grown matriarch. 2 restless subadults. 2 black-furred cubs barely a year old. They weren't moving. They weren't hunting. They weren't angry. They were watching. Breathing. Waiting. And when help finally arrived, they didn't scatter. They didn't attack. They stood their ground. Because this wasn't a territorial display. This wasn't fear. It was something else, something ancient. Something unthinkable. In the next 35 minutes, you'll discover a story that defies wildlife behavior manuals, survival logic, and everything science says about apex predators. You'll witness an unfolding connection between man and beast that goes beyond instinct, and into something far more human. So before we step into the trees, tap the like button if you believe the natural world still holds secrets we don't fully understand. Subscribe if you're drawn to real stories of survival, compassion, and the unexplainable bonds between humans and animals. And comment below, would you have trusted what the forest chose that day? Because this story isn't just about what happened in the wild. It's about what the wild did to protect one of its own. Let's begin. Sometimes, the forest chooses who to keep, and who to protect. The early morning sun barely pierced the dense canopy above as Ranger Adam Calloway pulled his truck off a gravel turnoff deep within Montana's Gallatin National Forest. A chill clung to the air, sharp and dry, biting at his exposed neck as he stepped out and slung his olive-green backpack over one shoulder. His boots crunched through a thin layer of frost that had settled overnight, even though spring was officially a week in. Out here, nature made her own rules. Adam was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with weather-tanned skin and a grizzled jawline speckled with flecks of gray. He wore his usual ranger uniform, worn canvas jacket, dark cargo pants tucked into scuffed hiking boots, and the leather-banded watch his father had given him before passing. His eyes, pale blue and watchful, scanned the empty trail before him. The plan was simple. He was scheduled to check trail camera 14B, located about 2 miles in along Ridge Creek Trail. It should have been a routine task. 30 minutes in, 30 minutes out. He didn't bring Remy this time. His retired search and rescue pointer was starting to limp on colder mornings. Besides, this was supposed to be quick. As Adam trekked into the forest, the sounds of the world softened. The distant rustle of branches, the faint creak of pine, even the occasional snap of a twig, it all faded into a rhythm that he knew too well. This wasn't just a job for him. It was the only place he ever felt like himself. Half a mile in, the terrain grew trickier. The trail narrowed, weaving between massive fallen logs and mossy boulders. Patches of ice remained hidden in the shaded bends of the path. He knew this area was prone to slips, but he'd walked it dozens of times before. Confidence, sometimes, is a louder killer than fear. It happened in a blink. As Adam stepped across a small bend near Ridge Creek's edge, his right boot hit a slick patch of ice, almost invisible against the frost-covered soil. His body pitched forward, momentum yanking him violently downhill. His shoulder slammed against a jutting branch, and he flipped sideways, arms flailing, gravity pulling him faster down the incline. The final impact was brutal. His body thudded against a rocky outcrop, and his head cracked sideways into the frozen ground. His radio, once clipped to his vest, bounced away, clattering somewhere behind him. His vision narrowed. Then, everything went black. Above, the forest stood still. There were no screams, no flares, no last-minute saves. Just a broken man lying motionless on a cold bed of pine needles, half buried under the weight of silence. His chest rose and fell shallowly, his face pale beneath a smear of blood seeping from his temple. He didn't know it yet, but he was no longer alone. And what would happen next would defy every law written in the Ranger Handbook. The Circle of Giants. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the tall spruce trees, casting narrow shafts of gold across the frozen forest floor. The search team had begun their patrol at first light, following protocol after losing contact with Ranger Adam Calloway late the previous evening. Leading the team was Elena Morales, a 27-year-old rookie ranger with sharp instincts and a sharper sense of loyalty. She was small in stature, barely 5 feet 3 inches, with tight curls tucked under a ranger cap and skin that turned bronze under the high-altitude sun. Her amber eyes scanned the forest like a hawk as her boots crunched steadily through frost and mud. She had only been assigned to Gallatin National Forest 6 months earlier. But already, she had learned to respect its power, the way it could cradle you one moment and swallow you whole the next. When Adam didn't check in, she volunteered without hesitation. Something didn't sit right. About a mile into the trail, just past a narrowing bend near Ridge Creek, Elena stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand lifted instinctively, signaling the rest of the team to halt. There was movement up ahead. Low to the ground. Wide. Slow. She raised her binoculars and steadied her breath. What she saw made her heart slam against her ribs. They weren't bears passing through. They were stationary. 5 grizzly bears. A matriarch, massive and gray around the muzzle, stood slightly ahead of the others, her head turned toward something on the ground. Flanking her were 2 subadults, their coats the color of old rust and early autumn. Behind them, nestled closely, were 2 cubs, their dark brown fur almost black against the snow-dusted earth. And in the center of this strange, silent semicircle was Adam Calloway. Unmoving. His ranger jacket was torn at the shoulder, and one arm lay twisted awkwardly under his torso. His face was drained of all color. The soft rise and fall of his chest told her he was alive, but barely. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The bears weren't feeding. They weren't roaring or pawing or charging. They were just there. Watching. Breathing. Guarding? She lowered her binoculars, blinking like she was trying to clear a mirage. This wasn't how grizzlies acted. These weren't conditioned bears. There were no trash bins here. No campsites. No food. These were true wilds, apex predators in their element. And yet, they stood in absolute stillness. She slowly unlatched her radio. "Base, this is Morales. We've located Ranger Calloway. He's alive, but surrounded. Not by people. By grizzlies. I repeat, he's surrounded by 5 wild grizzly bears." There was a pause, then static-laced confusion on the other end. "Say again? Did you say, surrounded?" "Yes, sir." No aggression. "They're just surrounding him. Holding ground." Behind her, 2 rangers adjusted their rifles. Elena shot them a sharp look. "No one raises a weapon," she ordered, her voice low but firm. "They're not attacking. They're not even defensive. We move an inch too fast, we blow everything." She inched forward, careful to keep her posture low and unthreatening. The snow cracked beneath her boot. One of the cubs stirred. The matriarch lifted her chin and exhaled, a deep sound that vibrated across the clearing like a quiet warning. The air thickened. Time stalled. And then, something unthinkable happened. The elder bear stepped forward, not toward the search team, but toward Adam. She nudged his leg gently with her snout. Not rough. Not curious. Tender. Elena's hand trembled against her radio. The bear lingered for a beat longer, her breath fogging in the morning cold. Then, slowly, purposefully, she turned, took 2 steps backward, and settled down on her haunches. The others followed, mirroring her stillness. It was a moment that none of them could explain. Elena whispered into her mic. They're not threatening him. They're protecting him. No one responded. No one needed to. Everyone felt the same electric mix of awe, fear, and reverence hanging in the frozen air. The forest had never felt quieter. As if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Minutes passed. The cold bit into their fingers, but no one dared move too quickly. Then, as if on some unseen cue, the bears began to disperse. One by one, they turned and lumbered into the trees, no panic, no urgency. Just purpose. When the last cub disappeared behind the ridge, Elena finally ran forward and dropped to her knees beside Adam. He was ice-cold to the touch, but alive. His eyelashes fluttered faintly. A smear of blood had dried against his cheek. His lips moved, barely. Warm, he mumbled. What? Elena leaned closer. Something, warm. Big. Breathing. Her eyes widened. He hadn't just been surrounded. He remembered it. And whatever had happened out there in the long, black hours between his fall and their arrival, it wasn't just nature. It was something else entirely. Memories in the dark. The fluorescent lights in the infirmary buzzed softly overhead, casting pale reflections on the steel-framed cot where Ranger Adam Calloway lay. His shoulder was wrapped tight in white gauze, his forehead stitched and swollen on the left side. One leg was braced. His breaths were steady, but shallow, as if his lungs were still catching up to the moment his heart had never left. Elena Morales sat in the chair beside him, eyes scanning the monitor, waiting. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her mind kept replaying the scene over and over, those massive grizzlies in the clearing, standing sentry like ancient guardians. She still didn't know what to make of it. A slight movement broke the silence. Adam stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened just enough for his pupils to react. His gaze was glassy at first, but slowly began to focus. Elena leaned in, voice soft but certain. Adam? It's Elena. You're safe. You're at the ranger station infirmary. His lips parted, cracked and dry. A whisper rasped out. How long? 2 days, she said. We found you yesterday morning. He turned his head slightly, winced, then froze. Something passed behind his eyes, not confusion, not pain. Something stranger. Like he was trying to place a dream that hadn't finished forming. I remember, he said, barely audible. It was cold. Then, warm. Something was breathing. Elena sat still. He turned toward her, eyes clearer now. There was fur. I felt it. Right here. He tapped his ribs. I thought it was Remy at first. But it was bigger. Heavier. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her jacket pocket and placed a small USB drive on the table beside his cot. We have trail cam footage. From camera 14B. It's not complete. But you need to see it. She walked over to the small wall-mounted screen at the foot of the bed and plugged it in. The image flickered. Grainy. Black and white. The timestamp marked it, 4:42 a.m. There he was, Adam, sprawled on the ground. And then, from the edge of the frame, the matriarch appeared. The massive grizzly stepped cautiously from the shadows, sniffed the air, then slowly, deliberately, lay down beside him. For nearly 30 minutes, she remained there, body pressed close to his, unmoving except for the rise and fall of her chest. At one point, she tilted her head back and let out a low breath that fogged the camera's lens. Two cubs wandered briefly into frame, but stayed distant, as if respecting the space. When the search party's flashlights finally appeared through the trees, the matriarch stood up, turned toward the light, and placed herself between Adam and the humans. The screen went dark. Adam stared, silent. His jaw tensed. "They didn't just find me," he said. "They stayed." Elena nodded. "We don't know why. But whatever happened out there, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't random. They chose to be there. They chose to wait." Adam leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down in a new way. "Then maybe," he murmured, "the forest isn't done with me yet." Return to the scene. 3 weeks passed. Adam Calloway's shoulder had healed just enough for him to lift his arm again, though every morning began with a dull ache that reminded him what the forest had taken, and what it might have given in return. Technically, he was still on leave. The Montana Wildlife Authority had asked him to rest, to undergo full psychological evaluation, and to avoid high-risk zones. But Adam wasn't a man of desks or paper trails. He was a man of instinct, and instinct told him something was unfinished. So, without permission, without a word to anyone, Adam packed a light bag, zipped up his field jacket, and took his old cruiser off the logbooks. He drove alone through the winding dirt roads of Gallatin National Forest, the same way he had so many times before, but this time, everything felt heavier. Quieter. Like the trees knew he was coming. The spring melt had begun. Small streams that were frozen a month earlier now trickled freely beside the trail. Branches glistened with thawing ice. The air smelled of pine sap and wet bark. He parked the truck at the same trailhead. Ridge Creek Trail. Trail Camera 14B. As his boots crunched into the soft soil, every step echoed louder than it should have. He passed the tree where Elena had first seen the bears. The ridge above where the matriarch had stood. And then, there it was. The spot. The ground was bare now. The snow had melted, revealing crushed brush and disturbed earth where his body had once lain. He approached slowly, each footstep deliberate. He half expected to feel something, fear, anxiety, maybe even awe, but what settled in his chest was a kind of stillness. A gravity. Then he saw it. Just to the right of the impact site, carved into the pale bark of a birch tree, were 3 long claw marks. They weren't random. They weren't messy. They were clean. Deep. Deliberate. Facing inward toward the hollow. He stepped closer, placed his palm over the grooves. They were wide, too wide to be from one of the cubs. This was the matriarch. There was no doubt in his mind. Was it a warning? A signature? A boundary? Or something else? He didn't have long to wonder. From above, maybe 40 or 50 yards up the slope, a figure appeared at the tree line. A bear. But not the matriarch. Smaller. Lighter in color. Its fur catching the sunlight like dry wheat. It was one of the cubs. No longer a child, but not yet grown. A sub-adult now. Taller, more muscular. It didn't charge. It didn't hide. It just watched. Adam's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. They stared at each other across the clearing, silence stretching between them like a bridge. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Adam knelt. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a granola bar, not to bait, not to bribe, but to offer. He peeled back the wrapper halfway and set it down on a flat rock near where he had been found. Then he backed away several steps, keeping his eyes low. The bear didn't move. Not yet. But its head tilted. Its ears twitched. its breath fogged in the cool air. Adam didn't speak. He just waited. And in that stillness, something passed between them. An understanding. Not language, not instinct. Something older. He stayed until the wind shifted, until the bear finally turned and disappeared into the trees without a sound. Adam remained another 10 minutes, then retrieved his pack and walked back the way he came. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because he knew. Unwritten rituals. Adam returned the next day. And the next. And the next. He brought no radio. No rifle. No map. Only a pouch made of old leather, worn and scratched, tied with a single strip of sinew, and inside it, small offerings, a carved wooden bird, a smooth river stone, a pine cone wrapped with braided twine. They were meaningless in the human world. But out here, they felt like currency. He would place one item on the same flat rock, always kneeling with care, then retreat to a nearby stump and wait. Not with expectation. Not with hope. Just presence. Sometimes the bear appeared. Sometimes it didn't. But each time he returned, the item had been moved. Not taken. Not destroyed. Moved. Once, the pine cone was gone, but a leaf had been placed on the rock in its place, curled into a spiral like a signature. Another time, the wooden bird was surrounded by 4 smaller stones, arranged in a near-perfect circle. Adam never spoke aloud. He didn't document anything. He didn't bring a camera. This wasn't research. It was ritual. A conversation with no words. By the 4th week, something had changed in him. His sleep was deeper. His breathing calmer. That perpetual tension in his shoulders, years of military alertness and forest vigilance, had begun to dissolve. He wasn't patrolling anymore. He was communing. But nothing stays secret forever. The wrong whisper eventually reached the right ears. Dr. Julian Rhodes arrived on a Thursday morning, uninvited. He stepped into the forest wearing a lightweight windbreaker, hiking boots too clean for real trail work, and a DSLR camera hanging from his neck. In his early 30s, with dark hair swept back and polished charm, he was a rising star in wildlife biology at the University of Montana. Last year, he'd published a viral paper on empathic behavior in apex predators, a theory that grizzlies, in the right conditions, could exhibit a rudimentary form of compassion. And now he wanted to prove it. When Adam heard the second pair of footsteps crunching through the leaves, he already knew who it was. He turned slowly from where he'd just placed a small river stone beside the pouch. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low but clear. Julian held up both hands in mock surrender. "I had to see it for myself. I didn't invite you. But you didn't deny it either." Adam stared past him, eyes narrowing. The energy had shifted. The forest felt suddenly alert. Every leaf seemed to lean in. Every branch listened. Then, movement. From the same ridge where the bear had first appeared weeks ago, a familiar shape stepped into view. It was her. The young bear, now larger, her golden-tipped fur catching morning light. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, stood the matriarch. The air thickened. Adam's breath slowed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But Julian, drawn by instinct or ego, lifted his camera. "Don't," Adam warned. Click. The shutter snapped like a shot in the silence. The elder bear shifted instantly, stepping forward, placing herself between her cub and the 2 men. Her head lowered slightly. Not in threat, in warning. The younger bear let out a soft huff. Not fear. Not aggression. Just discomfort. Adam stepped in front of Julian, his hands lowered, palms out. "It's okay," he said softly, more to the bears than the man behind him. "We're not here to take." only to return. He knelt again, placed a folded scrap of hide next to the pouch, and stepped back. The matriarch didn't charge. Didn't roar. She simply stood there, eyes locked on Adam's, reading something deeper than intent. And then, with one slow turn, she walked away. The younger bear followed. The woods exhaled. Julian dropped his arms. His voice was barely a whisper. Jesus. That wasn't wild. That was a choice. Adam turned toward him, eyes steady. I know. Julian looked down at his camera. His fingers trembled as he removed the memory card. I need to document this. This could change everything. Adam said nothing for a moment. Then, exactly. That night, back at Adam's cabin near the ranger station, the two men sat across from each other beside a crackling fire. Julian held the SD card between his thumb and forefinger. He stared at it as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, in a single motion, he tossed it into the flames. Neither man spoke as it melted. Because they both knew. Some truths aren't meant to be shared. Some are meant to be protected. The flood and the fight. The spring storm didn't arrive with a roar, it crept in low and heavy, like a held breath stretching over the mountains. Adam had seen the signs for days: swollen rivers, melting snowbanks, tree roots exposed where the soil had quietly washed away. Trail 17, Ridge Creek's winding path, had flooded before, but not like this. What worried him wasn't the water. It was what lived near it. By the time the first lightning forked across the sky and thunder rumbled low behind the ridgeline, Adam was already pulling on his boots. He didn't bring a gun. He didn't bring a radio. Only a coil of rope, a small knife, and a gut-deep sense that something was about to break. The rain fell sideways by the time he reached the overlook above Miners Hollow, a deep gully where Ridge Creek had once trickled peacefully through moss and stone. Now, it was a raging river. White water foamed and surged over boulders, slamming into fallen logs like fists. Trees trembled in their roots. Mud slid down the hillsides in long, dark streaks. And then he saw it. A flash of movement. A blur of soaked fur. A bear cub. Not quite full-grown, the younger grizzly he'd been meeting. She was in the water, caught in the current, her body spinning helplessly toward a jammed log that formed a deadly snare. Her head popped above the surface, then disappeared. She wasn't swimming, she was drowning. Adam didn't think. He ran. Slid down the embankment, half falling, half surfing on wet earth. His boots hit the edge of the river and nearly lost traction immediately. He found a pine, wrapped one end of the rope around its thick trunk, the other end around his chest. Then he waded in. The cold hit like a punch to the ribs. The current yanked at his legs, nearly pulling him under. He gasped, fought the drag, and pushed forward with every ounce of strength he had. The bear was wedged sideways against the log now, one paw clinging desperately to the bark, the rest of her body submerged. When he reached her, their eyes met. She didn't flail. Didn't bare teeth. She stayed still, as if waiting for him. He hooked his arm under her shoulder, grabbed the rope, and began the brutal pull back to shore. The current screamed around them. His fingers burned. His vision blurred from rain and effort. But inch by inch, they moved. Finally, her paw touched earth. Then his. They collapsed in a heap on the muddy bank, gasping, soaked, shaking. He coughed up river water and wiped the grit from his face. And then, above them, a shape emerged. The matriarch. She stood on the slope above the creek, her thick fur soaked but unmoved by the storm. Her breath fogged in the rain-chilled air. She didn't growl. She didn't advance. She just watched. Adam met her gaze, hand still wrapped protectively around the younger bear. And in that moment, he understood. She had seen everything. Not just the fall. Not just the rescue. But the choice. When he finally stood, the cub leaned into him, staggering on weak limbs. They climbed the slope together, man and bear, step by slippery step. But when they reached the top, the matriarch was gone. Only her prints remained, pressed deep into the mud, facing them like an echo. That night, Adam didn't go home. He stayed at the ranger outpost, lit a fire high in the stove. The young bear lay curled under the awning outside, not inside, not caged, but close enough to feel the warmth. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She just slept. Safe. Alive. And when dawn came, and the rain finally stopped, he opened the door wide. She stood. Looked back at him. Then turned, and walked into the trees. Stronger. Free. Not lost, but chosen. Summer came late that year. The last snow clung stubbornly to the shaded ridges of Gallatin National Forest until mid-May, reluctant to loosen its grip on the high trails. The earth was slow to warm, as if it too hadn't quite recovered from winter. And Adam Calloway, the man who once patrolled every mile of those woods, wasn't walking them anymore. Because Adam was no longer a ranger. His resignation came quietly. No speeches, no handshakes or farewell parties. Just a form signed in blue ink, a nod to his supervisor, and his ranger badge left behind, though he hadn't realized at the time that it was missing. The office never asked questions. And he never offered answers. He didn't leave out of anger. He didn't leave because of fear. He left because something inside him had changed, and it wasn't something he could explain with a performance review or a checklist. Some experiences don't belong in reports. Some stories don't fit within policy. They live in silence. They belong to the wild. On his last day in uniform, Adam packed light. A canvas pack, a notebook, his worn leather pouch filled with tokens no one else would ever understand. He hadn't planned to visit Trail 17 again. He thought he'd said his final goodbye. But as he walked out of the ranger station one last time, his feet didn't turn toward the road. They turned toward the forest. He walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but reverence. The forest greeted him with rustling leaves and the distant calls of thrushes. Wind moved through the canopy like breath. He passed familiar landmarks, the gnarled tree where he once waited for hours, the ridge where the cub had first stared down at him, the slope he'd nearly died on. And finally, the stone. The same flat rock at the heart of the clearing where he'd left offering after offering. This time, something was waiting for him. 12 river stones, smooth and round, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center, a pine cone, cracked open and full of seeds, an image of life held gently in stillness. And next to it, gleaming in a patch of sun that broke through the branches above. His badge. Polished. Clean. Untouched by time or weather. Adam froze. It hadn't fallen here. It had been placed. He knelt slowly, heart pounding, hands hanging at his sides. He stared at the circle without touching anything. The silence around him was thick, not empty, charged, like something old and watching. He wanted to cry. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the knowing. The recognition. This was not random. This was response. A message. He turned at the sound of soft movement from the trees. And there she was. The matriarch. Older now, her silver-muzzled face even paler than he remembered. She stepped into view, slowly, deliberately. Her body bore new scars. Time had touched her, too. But her eyes. Her eyes held him. Not as prey. Not as threat. But as something else. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. she had come to witness. To acknowledge. And then, just as slowly, she turned and disappeared back into the woods, her massive form vanishing behind the veil of pine. Adam exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. He sat down at the base of the birch tree, beside the claw marks that had begun this strange journey. His fingers traced the grooves gently. Above them, he now noticed newer lines. Fainter, more shallow. The younger bear. Still watching. Still present. The wild, he realized, wasn't letting go. It was remembering. He opened his journal, hand trembling slightly, and began to write. The wild knew me better than most people ever did. I was never lost. I was never alone. I was surrounded. And I was chosen. He didn't take the badge. He didn't disturb the stones. He left them, just as they were. Because this wasn't a moment meant to be altered. It was meant to be left behind. As he walked back to the trailhead, slow, quiet, steady, he didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't need to. Because in every gust of wind, in every rustle of branches, he felt it. The forest had seen him. And more importantly, it had accepted him. Some stories are meant to be told. Others are meant to be felt, carried quietly, like a stone in the pocket of your soul. What happened to Adam Calloway in the forests of Gallatin wasn't just a story of survival. It wasn't about instincts, or territory, or a ranger who slipped and fell in the wild. It was about what happened after. It was about the 5 grizzly bears who found him, and didn't flee. It was about the matriarch who laid beside his broken body and breathed warmth into a man she could have ended in seconds. It was about a cub who returned to the same place, again and again, to meet him in silence. It was about a badge that vanished, and was returned, with intention. This story defies science. It doesn't fit neatly into documentaries or data charts. Wildlife experts may never fully explain it, and that's okay. Because sometimes, what happens in the wild doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be respected. Maybe the forest saw something in Adam that day, something beyond his uniform, beyond his species. Maybe it saw pain. Or gentleness. Or memory. And maybe, it chose him. In a world where we often try to control nature, to label it, contain it, manage it, this was a moment where nature looked back. And answered. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that compassion can live in the most unexpected corners of the earth, leave a like, share it with someone who believes, and subscribe to Paw Prints and Stories for more real, emotional tales of animals and the people forever changed by them. We bring you true stories that go beyond survival, stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and the wild, beating heart of nature itself. Because out there, beyond the trail signs and the radio static, the wild remembers. And sometimes, it forgives.